I'm just trying to make sure that you get the basics. Eat shit, sleep while the demons eat hatred. We are the matrix, or free from the matrix. I don't really care, just prepare you a makeshift. Dance in the mirror, mind, show a little cakeness. Keep them distracted, redact all the statements. They ain't see nobody with snakeskin shape shit. The temple is the only spaceship. I hear that middle eye remotely glides in the other people's minds. You wonder if you're channeling, I wouldn't be surprised. Was that really a mannequin or was it a spy? I tell you this, panicking don't help you decide. On the moving waveform, big brothers in the sky. Disguised in the balaclavas, gathering up intel. COVID and hoes still spitting when they send there. Allergies and doomsday preppers, they send mail by chemtrails. AI's biased toward brown skin males. First MGTOW came about, now there's incels. Lot of talk about who run the world, but you can't tell. Let's imagine a place in the middle of nowhere. There are two farmers, small families, and a few tribesmen each. One farmer grows apples and the other grows oranges. The farmers both create a demand for their fruits because they appeal to each other. Therefore, they strike a deal to swap after negotiating that the amount being transferred is fair. This is essentially the Libra motive in astrology, to engage in trade fairly and harmoniously when agreeing on the terms of value communicated. This is in accordance with the laws of the planet Venus, which rules Libra, the planet of love and money. In the worst case scenario, one of these farmers will experience a drought and the other farmer does not. The struggling farmer and their tribesmen may feel negative feelings such as embarrassment, inadequacy, fear, anxiety, envy, and those thoughts can become criminal. The inability to keep up the trade deal could be consumed by the desire to continue obtaining the other farmer's fruits despite the dilemma. Will the tribesmen grab some sticks and attack the other tribe to steal their supply? That might not be the ideal decision, being they don't currently have the food supply to strengthen their army. The opposing tribesmen may decide to defend their lot with sticks of their own, which they have the supply of food to feed their army to do so, because they aren't the ones experiencing the drought. There's yet to be any violation or violence of any sort. However, it is natural to envision how the thoughts can fester. In fact, the other farmer's intuition can lead them to empathize and think like the farmer experiencing the drought and how they would handle being in their shoes. To avoid conflict and quell any discomfort from having to state the obvious behind the drought, the farmer initiates a conversation stating that they will continue to honor the swapping agreement, that previously following through on each shipment was collateral for extending their trade. When Mother Nature fixes things, the other farmer can give what they normally would. Be mindful that there is no talk of loans or interest. This is merely an example of the simulation of life, optimistically handling a situation out of the player's control. This also displays why the planet Saturn, ruler of agriculture, is exalted in the sign of Libra. The commitment is expected to last long term, despite constraints and limitations. Fast forward 2 generations later, and both farmers have families that have extended as well as the tribesmen. One cloudy day, they hear an engine riveting and a vehicle appears traveling towards them. However, none of them have never seen anything like it before. A man accompanied by his assistant hops out of the vehicle and addresses the farmers. They ask if any of them would like to volunteer to come down to the city for a great opportunity. The tribesmen ask the men, "What is that?" referring to the car and how they can get one. The men reply, "This is a car, and the way that you get one is by buying one." The tribesmen respond like, "Buy, what is that?" The city boys replied, buying is when you pay money for something and someone gives you something you value in return for it. If you like this car, I can help you get one if you come to the city, because then you'll be able to afford one by working for money to purchase it. The tribesman, still puzzled by the money terminology, asks, well, what will we do about food? When we're down in the city you speak of? No worries, the businessman replied. I'll just give the farmers here 10 cents worth of gold for each apple and orange you guys need for the stay. The farmer looks at the man strangely and responds, I can't do nothing with these things you're placing in my hand. What are they? The man replied, these are mediums of exchange where I'm from, because we all agree they have fungible value. Store up enough of these and you too can come down to the city and buy your own car. The farmer took the coins from the man who came in the car and gave them apples and oranges according to what the man stated they were worth to them. When the tribesmen arrived in the city, they were in awe of the buildings, warehouses, and factories. The onlookers looked at them suspiciously because of the fruits they were eating. The city boys were eating bread and had no clue what the fruits were. They even asked for one, and the tribesmen responded, well, I guess so. The businessman from the vehicle interrupted before he could state any information on the business deal related to apples and oranges. It is going to cost you guys $0.25 apiece for one of those apples or oranges. The worker agreed to the terms and said when they get their check at the end of the week, they'll give them a few quarters for some apples and oranges. At the end of the week, all of the men, including the tribesmen, got their check, and the city slickers went to the tribesmen and paid them for some apples and oranges. The tribesman took the coinage and held them in his pockets, but later on that night, someone tried to rob him for the coins. Luckily, the tribesmen survived and told the businessmen about the ordeal. They said, man, you have to be careful holding on to money down here. Not everyone has it. Come with me to Midtown and I'll introduce you to a guy who will store your money so that no one takes it from you. But it's going to cost you a few coins to store your money there. Confused but willing to obey to avoid the threat, the tribesman paid the additional coins to store the money, and everyone hopped back into the car to go back up to the farm. The tribesmen, proud of their newly earned wealth, went to go buy fruits from their elder, the farmer, since they can afford it now. But one of the businessmen stopped them and said, before you do that, be mindful that if you want to come back to the city to earn some more money again, you'll have to pay a shelter fee since you got money now. After acknowledging the difference in his balance, after calculating the suggested cost of the rental unit, the tribesman says, well, how will I eat food? The industry man replies, you should have thought of that when you sold your food in the city. The businessman then paid gold for more fruits, and they all went back to the city. There was a lesson to be learned, the importance of perspective. I know for sure that your heads are filled with explanations on how this person used that one in that story, or who was the culprit, who should have done what and when, but the intent of telling it that way was to leave it open-ended to perspective. We all may have different ways of looking at it, and that would be our personal perception, but it won't mean that we're right. Notice the only feeling of emotion I put in the story was confusion. Granted, me and the characters were introduced to foreign things, but they all made decisions based on their own perceptions. What I will do now is break down the story how astrology does based on the signs, planets, and how they relate to money. The businessmen arrived at the farms offering gold coinage in exchange for fruit. They also introduced a feel of advancement by driving a car as well. Gold is associated with technological advancements. In fact, more gold can be recovered from a ton of computers than from 17 tons of gold ore. Not only is it associated with tech advancements, but with medicine as well. It is praised for its shiny quality, but initially for its durability, portability, fungibility, and divisibility. Take note that the farmers were not trading with gold. Money was still an intrinsic value. The only way it bridged to the external is through manifestation by way of cooperation in the tangible world. The only scarcity was by way of a natural disaster, and fortunately, the love for farming kept products being produced. Diplomacy rested on skill, behavior, and negotiating. This was the first time they saw money in a tangible form, but it did not come without danger involved. When getting to the city, the tribal settler almost got mugged. The scarcity from time-consuming mining is synonymous with the scarcity of waiting for harvest. Barley was used for trade first. 4 precious metals. Traditionally, gold is known as the money of the gods. In that terminology, you imagine a proud stance, even more so when other humans don't see themselves as gods. Throughout the empires, it is known how rulers not only adorned themselves with gold to emphasize presence, as the sign Leo suggests, but the kings also hoarded and reserved it by means of finance and government. Interestingly, precious metal also has strong correlations with the planet Saturn, as will be discussed later. In astrology, the sun represents ego and vitality. The sun essentially provides light for the earth, photosynthesis and food production, environmental conditioning, and vitamin D. Although silver is not mentioned in this story directly, its properties are found when the story fast forwards to the future when the tribesmen reproduced. The moon is reflective of life's fluid found in the lowest chakra, hence the moon falling in Scorpio, the sign that rules over excretion and the libido. The moon represents the life force, however, in its infancy. Think of the sun as its full potential as a fully developed human being. This analogy can be referenced to the lunar calendar being utilized before the solar calendar. Silver was in circulation as currency before gold. Silver is utilized for auto manufacturing, solar technology, electronics, soldering, and brazing, engine bearings, water purification, medicine, jewelry, tableware, precious metals. Colloidal silver in particular, which is silver in its liquid form, has been used for centuries to kill bacteria, viruses, and fungus because it is an antimicrobial. It is the silver ions, however, that is somewhat toxic to the environment and aquatic species, suggesting that using it in toys and clothes is stretching its use to a detriment. The dosage level can cause argyria, which turns the skin blue, but it's not fatal. In astrology, the moon represents survival instincts. If you determine the salesman's delivery of communication to be cunning and quicksilver, it is valid to attribute that to Mercury, but it's important to see it as it is. Mercury is information communicated on the surface level, usually to benefit the person speaking because the planet is always closest to the sun. Mercury has historically gotten the rap for being a trickster, con man, or a liar because its speed is quick to change positions on matters formerly communicated as it in the sun changes signs. With planetary transits comes changing likes and dislikes. Consequently, some deals are broken or shrugged off altogether. It cannot be blamed for not revealing more than it did at that time because Mercury, despite being known for learning and teaching, is not known for higher education, occult knowledge, or confidential information. That information belongs to Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. Information operating at its highest octave for the purpose of networking is attributed to Uranus. This is why I stress putting things in perspective rather than base things on your perception when studying astrology. The businessman pulling up in a car is a reflection of Mercury money because it represents transportation. Communicating the price they'd pay for the fruits was just enough information needed to engage in commerce. Commerce is what Mercury has been traditionally known for over centuries because it's essential to communicate effectively and transport in order to participate in trade. The fruits were purchased to con the tribesmen to travel with them, knowing an incentive would consolidate relationships not only with the tribesmen, but the farmers as well. It can be assumed that the words used were ego-driven to serve themselves because, as I mentioned, Mercury is so close to the sun at all times, so I call it the sun's secretary. The first expression of Venus in the story is when the farmers agreed to swap fruits. Think how this was first imagined in the mind of those desiring to have the other's crops, then making it a reality based on them both being able to benefit fairly through a transaction. This is a reflection of as above, so below, because the trees bearing fruit was already a manifestation of below, and the imagination above consisted of being able to consume the other's fruit. This is what Venus exalted in Pisces means, to be able to achieve whatever you imagine through harmonious cooperation. To think outside the box and confirm that you're not crazy when order is aligned to make that thought a reality. This is not individually based as a Mars or Sun construct would suggest, but only through cooperation can this magic occur. It is also important to note that money was in its most ancient form through this barter process because it was not a tangible medium of exchange. The money was in the honoring of their word with actions that backed them up. The price was put on the tangible items, apples and oranges, by way of weight or quantity. However, they chose to work it out. When the businessmen came into the picture, for the first time, we saw money as an external, tangible unit. Can we say it is the most evil introduction into our world? From observation, it was interpreted as a representation of the same word. The farmers spoke in a vow to swap fruits, but it expanded throughout communities far and wide to honor contractual words outside of only apples and oranges. You can now swap apples and oranges for a car in a sense, just only in the form of money because car dealers might want a house instead. The difference between Venus money and the sun money is gold is limited, therefore self-serving, but Venus is cooperative and infinitely abundant, just like the imagination. Fiat currency was not present in our story, but theoretically speaking, if it were present, the potential of the attempted robbery on the tribesman for his gold may have been mitigated. That does not imply that people with money don't still physically rob and steal, but the chances are slimmer when there is enough money to go around, one might argue. Let's focus on the concept of fiat currency more than how it's used for a moment. Fiat is not backed by any fixed, limited supply of gold or silver or by the word of the issuing country's government. Notice I stated the word. It is a reminder of the word used in logic for Venus money. It is also a sign of freedom from underneath the rulers who hoarded gold for their personal interests, because the government could issue fiat currency whenever they want to. Mars is a representation of independence as it reflects the one, or the first. Mars is also the soldier. When Rome could no longer pay their soldiers in gold, the soldiers quit in return. Fast forward to 1971, when President Nixon took America off the gold standard, it subtly meant that the soldier would no longer be purchased with gold, but by the US dollar backed by the US government. This time, debasing the currency worked. The Vietnam War continued until 1975. Shown here is a natal chart of when Nixon took the US off the gold standard. As you can see, Mars was in the 12th house, suggesting war was covertly in motion and confidential in the house of foreign lands, while Jupiter, the planet of expansion, was also in the other house of foreign lands, the 9th house. This brings me to explain Jupiter money. Jupiter equals quantitative easing. Quantitative easing was not present in our story either, but to explain it simply, we can imagine the attempting robber attending a government-funded program that teaches how to fix cars and fund their auto mechanic shop after graduating. Society should not expect this from its private citizens, but from their governments, because the private sector will majority be concerned with starting their own auto mechanic shops with their own resources, or resources from investors. If you're listening close enough, you can hear the repeated theme for the have-nots due to a finite money supply that rulers or a significant portion of the population have already acquired. QE is a monetary policy where central banks purchase securities in the form of government bonds beforehand so that it enables the government to print money to increase the supply. Lending to consumers and businesses increase while usually offsetting the lowering of interest rates. Be mindful that this process is based on leverage, meaning the central bank initiates this process with their reserved cash, assets, or precious metals. 1/3 of gold is consumed by the investment sector, and 1/5 of all gold is held by the central banks. In context, it is essential to know that Jupiter is defined as an expansion through investing and acquiring. Theoretically, if the businessmen in the car invested in government by way of quantitative easing, citizens may take the new money and buy cars from them with it. This is reflective of when journalists or economists state that QE does not trickle down as it suggests, but the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The consumer couldn't afford the car before QE, but let's also be mindful that the wealthy car dealer's business would also come to a grinding halt because they would no longer have demand. Therefore, no reason to manufacture a new supply of cars. This perspective pervades throughout a lot of sectors of the economy. I will break this down further when giving my concluding perception. Constraint was introduced in our story when the tribesmen attempted to buy more fruit from the farmer during their return to the farm. The businessman warned him that since he is now an earner, it is expected of him to pay for his own lodging in the city. The new circumstantial information interfered with the tribesmen's preferred consumption by introducing responsible consumption. Saturn money is rewarded through lessons that are usually taught through harsh realities. The tribesman who was invested at first now has to take accountability for himself by holding his own. Although it does not lead to fulfilling his wants of his routine diet, he does have gold coins stored in the bank, which he can supplement bread products for during the next week thanks to his business acumen. He will be recognized for the fulfillment of meeting that rental requirement as someone who works for what they earn and responsibly commits to their agreements. This life lesson has also taught the tribesman that his fruit diet and car purchases will come by laboring and a methodology of money management, for there are limits put on what he can accomplish in time. Everything cannot and will not happen at once. Saturn rules the crown chakra, the higher self on the third plane, as Saturn is the last planet of transition before the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I mentioned earlier that gold or sun money has similar attributes to Saturn's. Limits, for example, are illustrated in its supply. You can't borrow what you don't have in gold. Romans, in fact, stored their gold in a public treasury they called the Temple of Saturn in Rome. Do you think they also made this connection? When the businessmen arrived, they came in a futuristic vehicle never seen by the tribesmen and the farmers before. It was a show of advanced technology which clearly set them apart from the farmers, not necessarily in a classism sense, but by way of culture. The two factions operated differently, a Uranus attribute, as well as technology and groups or organizations. These two different groups or organizations, however, connected another Uranus attribute and became cross-culture through information. Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, or brain intelligence, which is evident by the businessman having the car, the same as the urban workforce observing apples and oranges. The tribesmen knew the businessmen possessed higher knowledge because they didn't have cars. The urban workforce knew the tribesmen possessed higher knowledge because they weren't privy to fruits, but ate cheaper bread. Knowledge was also conveyed unexpected and unpredictably in the case of the tribesman learning he suddenly had to pay rent, and that he could not only make money selling fruit, but could store that money in a secure place without worry of theft. This knowledge came on a need-to-know basis as the tribesman pursued his wish to buy a car. Wishes are also ruled by Aquarius, the sign Uranus rules. Cryptocurrency, in short, is a digital currency noted by how much it is traded and characterized by its inability to be controlled by a third party because mediumship is replaced with technology that cannot be augmented. This makes central banks obsolete. Notice I call this freedom money and not free money, however. It is still vague on how useful cryptocurrency is when it's not backed by anything, and in a lot of cases is only traded to be stored through speculation instead of having utility. Make note, however, that fiat currency is the same thing, a currency backed by the faith and word of a group of people who agree it is acceptable for trade. The same way Mars is free from the collective as it represents the self, Uranus represents freedom as well, but in a way that will ultimately result in the clustering of groups and organizations under a common goal, separating them from other groups and organizations by default. In mythology, Saturn castrated Uranus, who is Saturn's father, to rule the throne of Earth's realm. In theory, it is proposed that Uranus has returned for the throne with the internet and cryptocurrency, which is largely responsible for segmenting and freeing subordinates from oppressive institutions. When looking close enough, you can detect Neptune money in our story, even if you have to suspect it and investigate. As mentioned with Uranus, knowledge on how to build a car is born of higher intelligence like fruits in the urban community were, right? But just how were these products produced? Who was in control or owns the technology to produce it? Why did it take as long as it did for these inventions to reach their regions? Why and when was money made as a tangible medium? The main moment highlighting concealed information came when the businessman stopped the tribesmen from potentially giving away their fruit or offering to sell it. Either way, the businessman couldn't be too sure and made it clear that each fruit cost 25 cents. Either way this is observed, it can be perceived as deceptive, which is an attribute of the sign Pisces, and the confusion that can come from Venus being exalted in Pisces. Although the tribesman and the city worker were in the process of making the city worker's dream come true, in Capricorn's real world, no good deed goes unpunished, and the businessman made sure it didn't come down to that. Realism suggests the urbanite wasn't earning the same as the tribesman, therefore fair exchange, no robbery. Pisces also rules over charity, but in this scenario the businessman perceives no charity is needed for men who hold their own. Had the tribesman gave his fruit away to the city worker, he wouldn't have had the money to buy bread when he returned from the farm, which would have made his environment under more constraint with the inability to eat because of his newfound rent expense. If he would have sold it at the price he bought it at, and he would have known nothing about profit, which enables opportunity to repeat the process while being able to compensate oneself for providing the service of distribution, it can be suspected also that the additional 15 cents the businessman added to the fruit price was for transportation costs for driving the fruits from the rural farm to the urban city, something the tribesmen wouldn't be expected to automatically factor in, being they are learning as they go. We can suspect the businessman bought additional fruits the second time visiting the farm to sell to the city workers for a profit when he returned. Some may suspect the businessman was being deceptive when doing that by cutting off the opportunity for the tribesmen to continue doing it. But others can perceive it as being a hard knock life and teaching moment of Jupiter wisdom from a successful businessman being passed along to the newbie, suggesting only the wealthy should donate or practice philanthropy. The entire story is Neptune by nature because Neptune is the finished product, the combination of all on the earthly plane and the spiritual plane. Neptune also rules over inspiration and is the higher octave of Venus. If the tribesmen did give the fruit away, it may have been frowned on by the shrewd realists of the earth, but the compassionate gesture would have still been seen by the spirit. Pluto equals empowerment. Everyone in our story has experienced Pluto money. In simplest terms, Pluto was expressed every time a character learned something new through revelation, the digging up of something that was not previously known. The farmer experiencing the drought became empowered when it was revealed that the other farmer would still provide them fruit without being immediately compensated. That farmer became empowered when receiving gold for fruit when it was revealed gold was a currency traded among citizens in a distant land which he could buy a car with. The tribesmen learned they could earn gold currency which allowed them to buy what they wanted, that the outside world provided in something called a marketplace. The businessman became empowered when a new town and civilization was revealed to him, which opened up an opportunity to make more money and expand business practices. We can imagine how the future of these characters could look the more their society gets revealed to them. The readers of this story are represented by Pluto because Pluto represents research. They're digging up of information to empower oneself so that they can become the smartest in the room. Pluto is where you feel inadequate, and in return, where you are adequate. It represents ruthlessness or considerable amounts of patience for the purpose of execution and takeovers, or changes in seats of power. The urbanite may become the businessman. The tribesman may become the banker. The more revealed, the more power or corruption. Once upon a time in my academic career, I was resentful of financial liberation because I observed that its presence did not guarantee quality. In fact, many instances revealed how quantity made the ugliest parts of society visible. But my better judgment showed me that the opportunity for those people or entities to be what they were meant to be, or at least the pursuance of it, was their right as a citizen of planet Earth. It took me some time to determine which side of the financial spectrum I'd side with. In hindsight, I understand why I resonated with Keynesian monetary policy in college. Quantitative easing and expanding the money supply, in my opinion, is preferred over financial restraint. This does not make me an anti-capitalist, but anti-instruction. Let me clarify. Venus is the medium of exchange, aka money in astrology. Venus is exalted in Pisces for these major points in relevance to my position. Venus is harmonious, interaction, while Pisces is boundaryless. In its essence, Venus's interactions, with the exception of making love, is not tangible It is intangible and intrinsic. What happens when rulers, merchants, and consumers agree to make money into an external tangible unit? Throughout its accepting duration, the currency gets debased in every subsequent empire. But gurus and philosophers often argue that it's due to artificially increasing the money supply that empires crumble. The reality is, humans' appetite to create, innovate, and experience is inevitable. Therefore, putting a cap on that propensity is blatantly telling people with not enough money that they cannot do what people who can afford to do that thing can do. People have even went public saying that all they had to do was work hard and pull themselves up by the bootstraps to afford to do what they want to do. In my opinion, that is code for slave or labor for those who have money for their innovations to become a reality. If the CEO of a company truly entertained the idea that you too could do what they do through capitalism, why set the pay gap so far apart? The problem is, rulers put a price on money. Venus in Pisces shows us there shouldn't be a price on the money itself, but on the product, good, or service. The actual tangible thing as substance warrants valuation. The deed of assisting another so that their dream comes true is priceless. Scarcity of money supply is the root cause of human degradation, the cause of many illnesses, and destroyer of vitality. Allow me to give you an example of abundant money and scarce money. If you and I agree to create a project that requires both of our expertise, and you ask me, when do we have to get it done? And I reply, when, in divine timing, we will get it done. Communicate to me your schedule and I'll do the same in return until we complete it. There is no deadline. That is an example of true money because there is no anxiety attached to it, rendering a fear of it not being accomplished. The format is boundary-less, giving room to harmony, a Venusian and currency-based interaction. On the contrary, as soon as I say the deadline is this week Friday, no later, that is why I'm paying you $1,000 to get this done. The project has automatically converted into coercion due to the boundaries of time constraint and emphasis on price. Not that the labor should not be accommodated, but in this instance I emphasized $1,000 as if it were increased to make the other party move faster at my will. Let's further expand on putting a price on the labor though. In a market where we can continue pressing the money printing button, the price for the labor has importance relative to the good or service the other party will want to purchase outside of the agreement. You might have your eyes set on a used car to get you around a community a bit. Therefore, you set your price at that very amount. Another employer may pay more, but it will not matter to you because the end justifies the means. The price is not put on the actual money, but rather a product. So I ask again, why would a ruler favor declaring money a scarce substance and therefore put a price on it? Well, if I could gather an army around to hoard and protect it from being stolen by you, it puts you at an immediate disadvantage and disparity. Is that the position and environment gold is in today? Can you walk up to a location where gold is stored, walk in and extract a gold bar and walk off into the sunset? No, but nor should you want to. If there was a major financial collapse right now, would you scramble the earth high and low for gold? If you answered no, what would you do instead? Let me continue by explaining my take on inflation for those who perceive it to be theft. The definition of inflation is an increase of prices with simultaneous devalue of money. $1 in 1971 is equivalent to $7.45 in 2023, the year this film was created. In context, I can still get the same items unless, of course, a merchant created scarcity on eggs, for example. The goods I would normally frequent based on the dollar in 1971 and the $7.45 has just been compromised by the hyperinflation of eggs. But do I not have the economic freedom to refuse paying that price? You might say I don't have a choice if I can't afford to pay it. But in a world where money is abundant because of debt financing and quantitative easing, I will be able to afford it. In a world without those financial vehicles, I may have no choice. Let's imagine for context that I have a budget, therefore removing eggs from my list every week for the next year because it costs $5.99 a dozen is what I decide to do. Financiers raise interest rates to 4% at this time. So I buy beans as a substitute good for $2 a bag and save the remaining $4 in an interest-bearing savings account. At the end of the year, I saved $192 and earned $3.56 in the process. At the end of the year, the price of eggs also decreased to $4.69, not the same as its price of $3.50 before the recession, but less than its inflated price nonetheless. Those against increasing the money supply will argue saving is for suckers, while I'm $195 richer than I was last year because I altered my diet with the free choice of non-participation within a small pocket of the economy. Their argument is I shouldn't be subject to the increase of price due to too many dollars chasing the eggs. But speak for yourself. Missing out on eggs is not the end of my vitality and well-being. Cutting off my access to funds, however, is a sure blow to my well-being. So then the talks of the correlation of unemployment and higher interest rates, of course, comes up when I support this stance. And my rebuttal is, go ahead and fire me. As long as I have access to money, I don't care. I guarantee that when I get funding to finance my dreams, what I want to do in life, and I'm going to turn it into a product and service and will survive and thrive. Those who argue against my stance and vocalize rising unemployment with high interest rates are inadvertently revealing that they favor the exploitation of labor and zero-interest loans to expand the exploitation of labor. So what if loans will be harder to obtain for the citizen because of the higher interest rate? I'd rather enter an agreement where I'm obligated to pay a bigger return than I am offered to pursue my true goals and talents than to be underpaid by a corporation whose CEO is okay with paying themselves 399% higher than what they pay me. Not for my best use to society necessarily, but to merely survive under financial constraints. Those creditors would, however, get paid back when I feel it is time to pay them back, because the time constraint of a deadline, even 30 days, is a violation to Venus and Pisces. It is a Saturnian boundary put in place to coerce action on my behalf. That may not be of divine nature, but out of fear of not being in good standing with the creditor. This fear on behalf of the creditor as well that they will not get paid back. Or it could just merely be that they want to be paid back quicker for personal preferences, or just to hover fear over the borrower to ensure that they get paid back. Money should not have a constraint. It doesn't need a constraint. A person can self-impose restraint based on the education of their environment. Even when not trying, a human being's actions are under constraint, and it is the very thing that the wealthiest person in the world has in common with the non-wealthy. Think about a rich person in today's society right now. Could they order 100 million people dead, build 50 million buildings in 100 cities across 10 countries, and farm 3 apple trees within 24 hours? Not even if they had the money to afford it could they get these things accomplished, because the natural order of experience does not allow everything to happen at once. The people to be slaughtered might get informed through a leak and go in hiding. City officials may prohibit some of the buildings from being built onto sacred land. One of the countries may have war tensions that encourage sanctions on the rich person's home country. The apple trees need time to be planted in arable land, watered and cultivated over time before bearing fruit. So if this rich person has the money to do anything they want, but still cannot do it, why shouldn't everyone have access to the same finances to be in the same position? As an astrologer, I know some particulars that can explain the timelines of the revelation of one's riches in contrast to buried treasure. But limiting earthly constructs by dismissing the beyond that exists in the imagination is a direct abomination to Venus being exalted in Pisces. When there is no price put on money, you cannot as easily pay people to do violent thieving and violating acts to others. Those types of behaviors are only attractive when there is an air of financial scarcity. It may take years to train the criminal mind to refrain from taking from others, the same as it took time to train them to take from others over generations of time. Pisces is also associated with chaos. In context, when looking around in these times, you can see the negative impacts of financial liberation as stars considered too young to possess the riches they do self-destruct, or drug addiction increases due to the ease of accessing welfare and drugs. In theory, I'd say compassion, another Pisces trait, without discernment is a crime, which is revealed the hard way through experience, but it doesn't negate that lording over someone stems from fear and insecurity. Participating with someone of preference fairly in harmony is love. Once again, it is the price put on the product or service that is valuable, not money itself. Let me get back to my objective stance and explain further that the problem is not debasing the value of money, but the scarcity of it by declaring it tangible. For starters, let's go back to Venus and Pisces being the interaction between two or more in harmony being the highest form of money. It promises that what one imagines outside of Earth's realm in the corners of the mind can be manifest on Earth. Barley was the first form of money in tangible form. Its adaptation, however, is more prone to dry, cool climates with short seasons. Here we see our first concern of scarcity with our agreed upon wealth, where the solution is to maintain its flourishing environment for the future, and to store it when its process has yet to produce harvest. Its value is based in weight. Its production cost is labor. Metals was next, but deemed precious due to its glowing qualities and technological advances. Moreover, humanity observed its scarcity due to its rarity. Because of its time-consuming extracting method, the solution was to further its explanation while securely storing it. Its production cost is excavation, more costly than barley. Fiat currency came into play off the gold standard, particularly in 1971, in layman's terms, because the United States needed money to do things they were not able to do with their current supply of wealth. The production cost is minting, and governments profit from seigniorage, the difference between the value of money and the cost to produce and distribute it. Stagnant circulation of the currency creates an air of scarcity. Therefore, its users store it in banks with interest-bearing instruments. Printing is no longer as costly as the process has been converted to be electronically operated. The latest currency is Bitcoin. It is the first of its kind to be born with a limit fixed at 21 million units, presenting scarcity in its infancy and entirety. People store it and hoard it as an alternative to fiat currency in fear of financial collapse similar to gold, and they store it in similar interest-bearing financial instruments. Its production cost is mining or staking, proof of work. Its value is rooted in blockchain and Web3 infused dealings. Let's go back to stagnant circulation of the currency. Currency being fiat creates an air of scarcity. Out of all the currencies mentioned, fiat currency is the only one with no signs of scarcity until no one no longer wants anything from the economy. Here is where things get interesting. Allow me to create a simulation society with an economy. Inside this economy, there is a commodity basket with barley as food, housing as shelter, and a banker for security. There are 5 citizens in the population. 1 banker, 1 farmer, and the farmer's neighbor who has a wife and son. There is a fixed supply of $5 of currency in the economy. The farmer stored $1.50 they earned from the banker buying barley into his bank and pays the banker 10 cents for securing it. The farmer's neighbor had just paid $2 to the banker for their house mortgage. The farmer's neighbor spends another $1.50 on barley to feed themselves and their family. This accounts for all of the $5 in the society's existence. 30 days go by and both the banker and the neighbor need to replenish their homes with barley. The problem is the neighbor cannot afford more barley because a bundle is sold at $1.50. The banker has $2.10 to buy barley, which they spend $1.50 on, leaving them with 80 cents. Since the farmer paid them 10 cents in addition for each $1.50 spent on barley. 80 cents, however, will not be enough to buy another bale of barley next month. The banker sure would love to profit again from the neighbor putting down another payment on their mortgage so that they could afford the barley next month, but they will not due to the neighbor having no more money. The banker has 30 days to figure something out before they die of starvation. The neighbor's time has already run out and faces starvation and eviction. The farmer, on the other hand, has accumulated $4.20, which he stored in the bank. The scarcity of money creates criminal thoughts in the minds of the banker and the neighbor. Will the banker run off with the farmer's $4.20? Where would they go? They are the only people in society, so the money is worthless any other place but amongst them. Will he murder the farmer and take his barley? Is the neighbor thinking the same thing? Neither one of them have the skills to grow and harvest barley, so what would they do 30 more days down the road? Will the neighbor ask if they could work on the farm for $3.50 so they can pay their mortgage and eat for another 30 days? What if the banker asks the same thing on the same day, but for $1.50 in order to pay for another 30 days worth of barley? The farmer will not have enough to pay them both. So will the banker kill the neighbor and their family to lessen the demand? Will the neighbor murder the banker first? Another alternative is offering their labor on the farm in return for a month's ration of barley. It would only solve one of the neighbor's problems. And that's a maybe. What if 2 workers are one too many to help produce the barley on the farm? What if the work for food hire becomes jealous and murders the farmer out of envy for their superior position? Will the banker scheme with the neighbor to learn the farming craft first, then kill the farmer and take his farm? What good would it do if there is no one else to sell barley to? Not even to the neighbor's wife and son, because they have no money or skills at this point for that matter. This is what happens and what happened in every society that established a scarce currency and placed a price on it. I'm sure you're hearing this story as others are, and we're all forming a think tank on peaceful solutions to this problem. The entrepreneurial farmer has innovated a radish crop that grows year-round and will hire the neighbor's son and wife to till the crop if more money entered circulation. The banker noticed the farmer's horse has bred and dreams of using the horse for transportation if the farmer would let him buy it. In order for that to happen, more money needs to enter the economy. That fast, the thoughts of these citizens went from destructive, fearful, anxious, and murderous to hopeful, visionary, productive, and cooperative. I'd like to take this time as an opportunity to parallel mining and seigniorage production costs of money to interest-bearing savings accounts. The cost of an independent sovereign to make more currency is to be patient and practice self-restraint with the funds they already possess. This is an alternative to printing money, but if the growth of funds at the set interest rate does not at least meet the threshold of the individual's necessities like food and shelter each month as the principal compounds, the threat looming over their quality of life will naturally produce criminal thoughts due to the financial constraint placed in the environment. I just wanted to mention it now because there is a lesson to be learned in suffering or, moreover, substituting or sacrificing your wants for your needs. The squanderer has much to learn from the composed minimalist, but sometimes not until they are met with a dilemma. I should not have to trade if I don't want to in order to have my basic needs met, and that is what Aquarius is teaching us. That is what Aries has always asked of us as the baby of the zodiac, and that is what true freedom from exploitation looks like. I shouldn't have to say anything else to convey my point, that cash needs to be of no value in order for society to function well. So what if a hamburger costs $6,000 at a restaurant? My government or employer should ensure that I have more than enough to be able to afford it. If I wanted it, because it would not be the money I'd want in that scenario. It would be the hamburger. Increasing the money supply is an act of good faith with hope that the market takes care of itself as citizens continue to participate and trade freely and not be stagnated by a ruler stating there is no more money. Again, Venus or money in Pisces is harmonious wealth, infinitely abundant. That is what money is. I say all of that to say this. One of the most talked about topics at this moment in 2023 is central banked digital currencies. It has provoked these thoughts, and it is why you hear me reiterate how a lack of money causes crime and several other ill conditions. Let's imagine if you were given allowance during your childhood, guaranteed. Some of you were like, what? I did get allowance during my childhood, and if you did, that's great. I'm sure that boosted your confidence in the mornings at the store getting bacon, egg, and cheeses and banana milkshakes at lunch, but now imagine if you didn't get any. Then multiply that factor by thousands, even millions. Public assistance has done some great things for many people, but I can tell you from observation and experience that it's not enough. Financial shock has rocked the global economy so bad now that it is finally evident that a universal basic income is needed. The truth is, it was always needed. Remember I said in my example earlier when there was only $5 circulating in the economy? That reality said everything that needs to be said in support of basic income. The only reason the stock market keeps crashing is speculators keep talking about who owes what and when they have to pay it back while threatening to rob Peter to pay Paul when all we have to do is agree that we cannot stop the flow of money. It is infinite and abundant, and as citizens of the earth, each should at least have food, clothing, and shelter. And I believe the reason they want to zero it out at the end of the month if you don't spend it is They want you to stimulate the economy. At the same time, I think that is a fact the pessimists are too concerned with. What is bad about free money having an expiration date? Remember my analogy of even the richest person not being able to spend all their money in 24 hours? Individuals could be at ease knowing if they didn't get around to doing one thing, they could do it the next round of basic income they receive, rather than thinking of how they might have to take it from someone due to the uncertainty. Another concern is that the central banks will be able to track everyone's transactions. Again, my stance is, so what? Think about it. The income is for people to obtain the basics. Are you afraid of the government seeing your grocery and rent receipts? I have yet to hear the naysayers say anything about the economy outside of CBDCs. Cash may be a thing of the past, but I don't care because I haven't handled it in years except to do laundry. The truth is there will be an economy outside of CBDCs, and the Fed, along with the government, knows that. There is something called blockchain that is the most innovative and earth-changing invention since the printing press, in my opinion. People will build wealth, economies, cities, and universes on blockchain and Web 3.0. In fact, some already are. Money will take on new meanings and become largely environmental. Some of you may be skeptical because you don't see it, and seeing the crypto market's volatility and no meme coins are laughable and think NFTs are useless, but that is only because they're not in widespread enough volume. And there are several bad players in the market doing pump and dump get rich schemes similar to what you've seen in the stock market. I'm sure that CBDCs will at least flush out the non-valuable coins in the market just by entering it. It doesn't mean you won't be able to have your own coin one day or participate in the digital economy with someone else's coin. But if there is one thing we have learned from this content, it's that money and trade is an exchange of value. Therefore, why would I care if a currency skyrockets in price to the moon if I can't exchange it for something I need? Money is not to be traded. Money should not have a price. It is the good, product, and services we are after, not money.